Welcome to 320 Workshops. We're just beginning to gear up for our grand opening, and we thought we'd bring you a series of videos to show you what's going to happen in the shop and on this channel. First up is my design for a better way to store parallel clamps. In future videos, we'll be doing some furniture restoration and some build projects. Let me know what you like and what you'd like to see more of. Clamps are a big part of woodworking. There are a lot of different sizes, a lot of different styles, and just as many ways to store them. On my clamp rack, I have my longer F-style clamps on bars so that they're stacked one in front of the other. My shorter, smaller clamps are on a long bar where they're easy to grab. I tend to reach for these more often than the others. Then I have some Japanese clamps that are in the slotted style of rack, and a number of other different ways I have to store them, from good to bad. The worst being these down here that are just kind of squeezed onto some conduit. It works, but it's not very good, and that's a problem for another day. My big problem was my parallel clamps. They're big and they're heavy, and I wanted to store them up high so I could have plenty of room below that for storage. The problem is the traditional way from hanging them is with the business end at the top, which put the weight all at the top and became very awkward. I knew I didn't like that, and I couldn't figure out what I was going to do. So I kind of stacked them to the side, leaned them against the wall, laid the head on the floor, and that's when I realized there's a better way to store these. So this is the design I came up with. You can see that it's easy to take the clamps off the rack. Now they're down here, they're easier to handle and a little more balanced. The design is pretty simple and pretty easy to put together. But as you can see, this rack is full. I got 4 other clamps that are a little bit longer. So I need to build another rack to accommodate those. It's going to need to be a little bit longer, and I'll make it a little bit wider if I have to buy any more clamps.
First, let's look at the design in SketchUp. It's a total of 6 boards consisting of a shelf for the clamps to set on, a front cross member to secure them from getting knocked off, 2 boards to secure it to the wall, and 2 sides.
Here's my initial sketch. I want to capture the critical dimensions of the clamp in order to determine my dimensions of the rack. The clamp itself is 56.5 inches tall, 5 3/4 inches deep, and 2 inches wide. When I come to the design, I wanted to allow a board at the bottom for nailing purposes, so I made that a 4-inch board. The shelf then would be 6.5 inches wide. The distance from the top of the shelf to the top of this retaining board is got to be about 48 inches. What that does is 48 inches allows this to come down about 8 inches, and that gives me enough room to pull the bottom of the clamp out and remove it from the rack. So if I take all these dimensions, I can come up with my cutting list, and I'm ready now to lay out the boards.
I had some cherry boards left over from another project, but I think I can get all of my pieces out. But first, we'll take them over and mark out some rough lengths of each of the pieces. Now we'll cut all the boards to length. Take them to the joiner to edge one edge square. Then we'll surface one edge to keep it nice and flat, get any cupping out of it. And then it'll be square to the jointed edge. Now we'll go to the table saw and rip the boards to width. Then to the planer to finish the last surface. And now all the pieces are cut to length and width and ready for the next step. That's sanding. So we'll sand all the pieces through 120 and 180 grit on both sides. And then, since cherry tends to burn during the ripping process, I thought I'd take the plane to a couple of the edges to clean those up. Also wanted to put rounded corners on the shelf, so I marked them with a nickel, and then the easiest way is to take them over to the disc sander and sand those to the line. Now on the longer side boards, I wanted to put a larger rounded corner. So I pulled out the shaper, origin, and plate. The shaper uses the black diamonds to establish location and corrects itself as you follow the lines of your design. You can see on the screen the rounded corner path. It'll take several passes to get all the way through the board. Now I just have 3 more of those to cut.
Now we need to consider the joinery. This project could be assembled in a number of different ways. So I put together some examples. Let's take a look at those. The first option is the lowly pocket screw. It is a good strong joint, obviously not real pretty, but this is shop furniture. It would work really well. You can also hide most of the joints so that you could use it in this with no problem. So that's your first option, the pocket screw. Next option is the dado. So the dado would be a traditional way of insetting a shelf. I don't know that it would work really great with the other cross members, but it could be done. You could also use the dado for the shelf and some other joinery in the other cross pieces, but you would have to remember that the shelf or whatever's being put into a dado would need to be a little bit longer than what you need for the shelf space. So the dado joint is another option. Next would be a dowel joint. So a dowel joint works really well, lots of glue surface, very strong, very good joint. I won't say this is a great example here because I don't do dowel joints that often, but you can get the idea of what the dowel joint would be. The option I'm going to use is the domino. So a domino joint is, it gives you lots of glue surface, it's very strong, very fast and easy to put together. Of course, the domino would be the most expensive of the options simply because of the expense of the equipment. But if you're doing it professionally, it would make sense because you're going to save in the time. The other options, I guess you could use a mortise and tenon joint. That would be really nice looking if you put a through tenon. Or if since it's just shop furniture, you could just take butt it up, glue it, throw some screws in from the outside, and that would probably work just as well. But I'm going to go with the domino, so let's get started on the assembly.
So I've already marked all the locations of my mortises, so I'm going to put the board into the vise, and then using the domino joiner, I will plunge in the mortises at each location. You can see with the dust collector it's very clean. So now that I got all of those jointed, I'll round over all the edges with a little 1/8 inch round over bit. This is the shelf, so I'm being careful only to go back as far as what extends beyond the sides of the cabinet. The rest I'm also get a 1/8 inch round over. So now we'll begin the assembly process. Using Type Bond 2, and I like to use the pot to dip the glue in, the domino into the glue, and use that to assemble into the mortise. Now I'm using a brush to spread some more glue around the other end of the tenon as well as the edge of the board. It's quick to assemble and put them together, and we'll continue on with the rest of it. Oops, went a little too far and put some glue on the area that's not connected to the side. Go together pretty quickly. It's a matter of throwing some clamps on. And of course I'm using clamps that are not going to be stored on this clamper. In order to get underneath the shelf, I put it up on some little blocks so I can get the clamp to the back side of the rack. few taps to get it in line. And double check the square. Everything looks good. After about an hour or so, I'm able to take the clamps off. And make sure everything looks okay.
Here's where I hit a snag. I moved the current rack down a little bit so it can make room for another clamp wall to take care of those ones hanging on the conduit. But that's the problem, the conduit. This conduit runs along the wall, and for the large rack to fit on here, it's got to hang below that because I only have 8-foot ceilings. But it was a simple solution. Let me show you how I fixed it.
So here you can see the conduit lays right behind where the head of the clamp is. But I realized that it really wasn't going to give me a lot of problems. I wasn't pushing the head out that far. So I just needed to cut it a little relief on the back of the rack. So here I'm marking down 50 3/8 inches. And then I'm going to mark a center line across that. And then a parallel line about 1 inch in. I'm going to line up the reticle on the plate. Clamped it onto my shaper station. Placing the plate on top. Now I'm lining up that reticle with the line I drew. And I'm going to grab some clamps and hold it down to the rack itself. Not the best angle, but it was safe and it seemed fairly easy to do it there. Again, using the shaper, I had designed out a small relief. And you can see that allows just enough for the conduit to pass through. Then I took an 1/8 inch round over to finish off that corner like the rest of the edges.
All right, I gave it a final sand with hand sandpaper, just looking for, I like to kind of go over it like that so I can make sure that there's no blemishes or anything that could be remaining. So then I went over with a tack cloth to get all that off. So I've set up with my drop cloth, put it up on rack so I can get a nice coat on it. So I'm going to finish it with Osmo wood wax finish. I find this has got a good finish to it. I also did that on the last one and it seemed to hold up pretty well. So I'm going to get started here. I'll get this, get my gloves on.
I like to apply Osmo with a cloth, and I put on a coat, let it set for about 30 minutes, buff that off, put a second coat on it, and let it dry overnight. Then it was ready to be hung.
So there you have it. May not have solved the world's problems, but I find storing my clamps this way very efficient and easy to use. Works for me. You might want to give it a try. Thanks for watching.